As I reflected on option for today's presentation, I found myself looking at approaches that have been done before. The first version is a general reference to a person with a position, like President Barack Obama, first president of the United States. The second approach refers to a specific reference of an accomplishment. Hank Aaron broke Babe Ruth's home run record. And the third option includes a timeline of historical events. Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, etc., etc. But as I reflected, I realized that I didn't really want to go down that direction. So I spent a little time in the sermon and prayer. And you know the wonderful thing about prayer? If you pray and you listen, you'll get the answer in a way that you weren't even anticipating. Would you like to know where I got my answer this year? Facebook. Yeah, true, Scout's on. I was flipping through my Facebook feed and I saw a post that literally made my blood boil. A newspaper article in Linden, Alabama published an editorial under the headline, "Klan Needs to Ride Again." Yes, you heard me correctly. The first line in the first paragraph of the article said, "Time for the Ku Klux Klan to ride again." Now, the editor of that particular newspaper has a long history of inflammatory comments. I wasn't surprised by his comments at all, because I understand the mentality of people with his philosophy. Would you like to know what my issue was? My problem is that some of the people who had a whole lot to say when they discovered an elected official in Virginia had pictures of himself in the yearbook, in blackface, in Klan garb, were the same people who were noticeably silent when that article appeared in that newspaper. Let me say it another way. Some of the people who claim to judge everybody by the content of their character are the same people who refuse to hold members of their own community accountable when they know their family, or their friends, or their co-workers, or their church members are judging somebody by the color of their skin. But it goes further than that. My problem is that some of the same people who were sitting in church earlier today, professing to be children of God on a journey to Judgment Day, are the same people who would tell you that celebrating Black history is somehow prejudice. So with this in mind, the theme of my presentation today is Black History Month Revisited. Why should we continue to study Black history? In the first part of the presentation, I will share with you a summary of Dr. Carter Woodson's biography and a few key events that shaped Black history as a field of academic scholarship. The most significant being the establishment of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915, the publishing of the Journal of Negro History in 1916, the creation of Negro History Week in 1926, the expansion of Negro History Week to Black History Month in 1970, and the acknowledgement of Black History Month by President Ford during the bicentennial in 1976. In the second part of the presentation, I will formally define organizational culture and present 3 historical experiences that are shared by every member of the Black community. Most notably, we are descendants of an enslaved people originally from the African continent. We were systematically denied the ability to acquire and transfer intergenerational wealth. And our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents lived during a time where racial discrimination was illegal. Is it okay if I do that for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Woodson was born in 1875 in New Canton, Virginia. He was educated at Barrera College, the University of Chicago, and Harvard University, where he was only the second Black person to ever receive a PhD degree. Dr. Woodson was a professional educator and an accomplished author. He served as an academic dean at West Virginia Collegiate Institute, and he also served as the dean of College of Arts and Sciences at Howard University. Dr. Woodson created the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915, and he published a Journal of Negro History in 1916. Dr. Woodson was motivated by the belief that formal education, coupled with person-to-person contact between blacks and whites, could reduce racism. But there was another thing that he had in mind as well. Dr. Woodson also believed that creating a historical record of the contributions of the black race to American history was essential for our survival as a race of people. His specific quote reads as follows: "If a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated." With this in mind, Dr. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History created Negro History Week in 1926. The celebration was scheduled for the second week in February to honor both President Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, whose birthdays were on February 12th and 14th respectively. The purpose of the celebration was to encourage public schools to present scholarly material on the numerous contributions that the Negro race made to American society. The early years of Negro History Week were extremely successful. The initial event prompted the creation of additional events, and they were celebrated in black churches and black history clubs across the country and ultimately around the world. While this was happening, Dr. Woodson continued to author books and publish articles. For example, in 1933, he released his seminal work entitled "The Miseducation of the American Negro." Throughout the pages, he provided additional arguments in support of the notion that scholarly study of black history was a critical component to the education and religious elevation of the race. His specific quote reads as follows: "The Negro, whether in Africa or America, must be directed towards a serious examination of the fundamentals of education, religion, literature, and philosophy as they have been expounded to him there. He must be sufficiently enlightened and determined to determine for himself whether these forces have come into his life to bless him or to bless his oppressor. After learning the facts of the case, the Negro must develop the power of execution to deal with these matters as do any people of vision." Dr. Woodson passed away in 1950, and over 20 years that immediately followed his death, black history continued to be fueled by the civil rights movement at home and armed conflicts abroad. Despite the chaos that happened over the next 2 decades, Negro History Week continued to flourish. Negro History Week transitioned to Black History Month at the end of the 1960s. This tradition was proposed initially by the Black United Students Organization and black educators at Kent University in Ohio in 1969. The proposal was accepted and enacted for the first time 1 year later in 1970. Black History Month achieved a wider range of general acceptance during the United States Bicentennial celebration in 1976. During the nation's 200th birthday, President Gerald Ford urged all Americans to celebrate black history as an integral component of American history. His exact words are contained in the following passage, and I quote: "All Americans should seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout history." Remember before, when I presented the theme for today's keynote, I asked the question, why should we continue to study black history? The answer is simple. We should continue to study black history to correct the American historical record, to better understand our American culture, and ultimately plan for our future. But before we get into the next part of today's presentation, there are a few key takeaways I want to make sure that I highlight right now. First, the study of black history should not be confined to a single month. The study of black history should not be limited to black people. Why? Because black history contributes to our collective understanding of American morality. Peter N. Stearns explained the basic reasoning in an article entitled "Why Study History?" The article was published on the American Historical Association's website in 1998, and his specific quote reads as follows: "History also provides a terrain for moral contemplation. Studying the stories of individuals and situations in the past allows students of history to tell his or her own moral sense, to hone it against some of the real complexities individuals have faced. A study not only of certified heroes, but also of ordinary people who provide lessons in courage, diligence, or constructive protest. To put it more bluntly, the history and the historical record of the United States of America is incomplete because it does not fully incorporate the American descendants of enslaved people into the historical narrative. Until we as a country adequately address the inaccuracies in the historical record, we will never be able to have an open and honest conversation about American morality. This conversation cannot happen if we are only discussing these topics during the month of February. And it cannot happen if we are only discussing these topics with 13% of the American population. But I am an eternal optimist. I believe there is hope for the future. The key lies in an understanding of American culture. In the J.T. Wren edition of the Leader's Companion, there's an article entitled Organizational Culture. It was written by a scholar named Edgar Schein. In the article, E.H. Schein presents the reader with one of the first operational definitions of culture. It reads as follows. Culture is a pattern of shared assumptions that a group learns and solves problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore taught to new members as a correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. There are a few key things that I would like to point out in this definition. 1, the pattern is recognizable. 2, the pattern worked. 3, the pattern is taught to the next generation by the current generation. And 4, the pattern instructs the next generation how they should think and feel about those problems. Now let's spend a minute or two thinking about how the definition of culture in a general sense applies to American culture in a specific way. What were the problems that the early colonizers were trying to solve? What worked? What were they taught? How were they taught to think and feel? The foundation of American culture is captured in the first sentence of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It reads as follows. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, American culture is very simple and easy to understand. It is based upon the principles of equality and individual rights. These principles were developed because the colonizers believed that the British monarch was a tyrant, and that the very concept of a monarchy was inherently oppressive. The concepts of equality and individual rights worked. The concepts were validated as solutions, and as a result, these cultural values were taught to successive generations in their homes, schools, and communities as the correct way to think and feel about equality and individual rights. Now that we have addressed the principles of American culture in a broad sense, let's apply the same methodology to Black culture in a specific way. Is it okay if I do that for you? I'm not talking about the cultural appropriations definitions used by media and advertising organizations to perpetuate stereotypes or sell products. I'm referring to the pattern of shared assumptions that our Black community learned to solve its problems as it navigated hazardous waters. What are these shared experiences? Let me remind you. First, we are descendants of an enslaved people originally from the African continent. Second, we were systematically denied the ability to earn and transfer wealth. This denial impacted generations from 1619 until at least 1968. Now, for those of you who are doing math, That is 349 of the last 400 years. And that does not include things done over the last 51 years to continue to impede our progress. Things like red light, white flight, predatory lending, and gentrification. Third, our parents and grandparents, our aunts and uncles, and all of our elder cousins lived during a time when racial discrimination was legal. It was both literally and figuratively the law of the land. And many of our elder family members who lived through all of that are still alive today. Why is it so important to our understanding of Black culture that our community elders are still living? Because they learned the espoused values of equality and individual rights highlighted in American history while they were attending segregated schools. In the process of attaining their formal education, they also identified the unarticulated hypocrisy inherent in an immoral system, a system that simultaneously empowered American descendants of free people from the European continent while systematically oppressing American descendants of enslaved people from the African continent. Our family members and community elders taught us to remain skeptical in a society that was driven by moral relativism. They did this to keep us safe during interracial interactions because those interpersonal situations could be dangerous for us. They did this to give us the opportunity to be successful in an environment that was inherently unequal. By studying Black history in a scholarly manner, we gain a deeper understanding of the multi-generational cultural experience shared by almost every single African American person alive today. In addition, we gain an appreciation for the different paths that American subcultures use to get to this point in our collective American history. Finally, this formal study gives us yet another opportunity. It gives us yet another tool that we can use to recalibrate our moral compass. And with morality as our guide, we can determine the best way to move our country forward. During today's presentation, I shared with you a summary of Dr. Carter G. Woodchin's biography and a few key events that shaped early days of Black history and its academic field of scholarship. This included the Association of the Negro Study of Life and History, the Journal of Negro History, the creation of Negro History Week, the transition to Black History Month, and acknowledgement of Black History Month by President Ford. In addition, I defined organizational culture and presented 3 historical experiences that are shared by every member of the Black community. We are descendants of enslaved people, originally from the African continent. We were systematically denied the ability to acquire and transfer intergenerational wealth. And our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents lived during a time when racial discrimination was legal. Furthermore, I discussed the primary reason why we should continue to study Black history. The most important being, we need to correct the American historical record. We need to understand American culture at a high level and how that American culture at a high level is supported by subcultures that keep it standing. Finally, I offered a few additional key takeaways that are summarized as follows. The study of Black history should not be confined to a single month. The study of Black history should not be limited to Black audiences. Black history contributes to our collective understanding of American morality. And last but no wise least, Black history is American history. Thank you guys so much for giving me this opportunity.